We are all familiar with the intense security measures in airports, which can sometimes be infuriating, especially when you are already late for your flight. There are loads of security checks, from metal detectors to body scanners, luggage searches, cameras, background checks on passengers, and more scrutiny of passengers who bought their flight tickets with cash. This tedious process was not just implemented out of the blue, but rather a reaction to the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. It was the flight hijacking executed by D.B. Cooper in 1971. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, an individual in his mid-40s wearing a suit with a black tie and carrying an attaché went to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter in Portland. He purchased a one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle with cash. The ticket was bought under the name of Dan Cooper. This individual boarded the Boeing 727 plane like every other passenger and ordered a bourbon and 7-Up. But he had other plans besides arriving safely in Seattle. At about 3 p.m., he signaled to flight attendant Florence Schaffner for her attention. When she walked over, he handed her a note. She initially didn't read it, thinking he was trying to make a pass at her, but he whispered to her, "Miss, I think you better read that note." The note read, "Miss, I am hijacking this plane. I have a bomb. Sit next to me." He indicated that he wouldn't think twice before detonating the bomb if his wishes were not granted. He ordered her to sit beside him as he opened the attaché case to reveal its content. The case contained multiple wires and red-colored cylinders. He then instructed her to write a note on his behalf demanding $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a refueling truck as soon as they reached Seattle at 5 p.m. Today, Cooper's attaché case would never have been able to pass through all security checks without detection. Schaffner then delivered the note to the captain, who instantly began making provisions to cater to Cooper's demands. During the journey, Cooper instructed that everyone remain seated in the plane except for another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, who would go and fetch the ransom. When they reached Seattle, the flight circled in the air for 2 hours while security operatives sourced the ransom from several banks across Seattle, along with other requested items. At around 5:24 p.m., the captain received information that the ransom and parachutes had been delivered to the airport and they could now land. After landing, Mucklow exited the plane to retrieve the money while others remained seated. The passengers, a total of 36 individuals, were allowed to leave the aircraft immediately after Mucklow returned with the money and parachutes. However, he didn't let the 6 crew members go. He was livid about the money being delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as specified. To solve this problem, he cut the canopy from one of the 4 parachutes and placed the money in it. He ordered the crew to refuel the plane as they were to take off again for Mexico City. By 7:40 p.m., they did as instructed and began the new journey. When they got to Southwest Washington State, just between Seattle and Reno, Cooper tied the money bag around his waist, then lowered the rear stair door of the plane at 8 p.m. He jumped out of the plane with the money and deployed the parachute. This was the last confirmed sighting of D.B. Cooper. Neither did anyone see him safely land or crash. Even if he didn't land safely, his body and the huge sum of money were never found. The name DB came about from a reporter's mistake, who had mentioned DB instead of Dan, the name of the flight ticket. The name DB Cooper has since stuck. Security operatives were able to retrieve partial DNA from his tie, which was left behind on his flight seat, and cigarette butts and hair samples from his headrest. Despite this number of evidence, Cooper was never identified or found to this day. On February 10, 1980, almost 9 years after the flight hijacking, an 8-year-old boy found 3 tattered packages containing 290 $20 bills on the bank of the Columbia River, matching the serial numbers of the ones given to Cooper. This has been the only finding of the money that could help with the investigation since that time, but unfortunately was a dead end. Investigators believe that the bags fell into the Washougal River when Cooper attempted to land with the parachute. Water then carried it to the Columbia Riverbank where it was found. It's been 51 years since this incident, and investigators have interrogated thousands of suspects. Yet no one can give a definite name or even put a definite face to the perpetrator of this hijacking. No one could even ascertain if DB had died or survived the plummet. The notes he collected that day also vanished into thin air without any trace of them being spent anywhere except for the bills found along the Columbia River. The world has no choice but to live in ignorance of how DB Cooper possibly went into oblivion. However, several individuals, bodies, and groups have tried to map out the possible aftermaths of that incident. The two major theories are that he survived and, on the flip side, he didn't. Let's scrutinize each of these theories before we look into individuals suspected to be DB Cooper. The FBI opened an investigation on the incident called Norjack, meaning the Northwest hijacking. The FBI largely believes Cooper didn't survive the jump from the plane. Still, it couldn't reach a conclusion before the resources for the investigation were reallocated to other active cases making headway on July 8, 2016. The FBI claimed that his choice of clothing for the hijacking, a suit, was not suitable for a rough landing from a parachute, and worse, they believed he wasn't a professional at diving off planes. There is, however, a possibility that the FBI cannot just accept defeat. This man made them deliver loads of money to him and slipped away right under their noses. Their consolation could be convincing the world that DB Cooper died. The more prominent theory is that Cooper survived on that day and beat investigators by going into oblivion. Cooper surviving the incident seems like the more logical explanation since his body was never found, and security agents didn't come across any evidence to support his death. Private investigators and individuals have been trying to figure out Cooper's identity to obtain clues on his whereabouts. The leads are in the DNA samples collected, which were lost during the course of the investigation. A sketch drawn from witnesses' descriptions and speculation that he was an expert in parachuting. We will now examine a few of the people suspected to be Cooper and see if they meet any of the criteria used in identifying him. The first suspect we'll be looking at is Richard Floyd McCoy. McCoy was an Army veteran and recreational skydiver who had attempted to execute Cooper's flight hijacking style on April 7, 1972. Just like Cooper, he hijacked the plane by claiming to have a grenade in his possession. He demanded a $500,000 ransom and 4 parachutes. After receiving the ransom, he ordered that the plane be flown again. He then jumped out of the flight in Provo, Utah. The operation was a success, except that he left behind the hijacking instructions note, which had his signature and a magazine with his fingerprints. He was arrested 2 days after with the ransom money found in his possession at the time of his arrest. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison but escaped from jail. He was later tracked down and, instead of surrendering, engaged in a shootout with FBI agents where he was shot and killed. The FBI agent who shot McCoy claimed his last statement was that they shot DB Cooper at the same time. The second suspect on our list is Robert Rackstraw. Rackstraw was a retired pilot who worked as a crew member on an Army helicopter. In 1978, he was arrested and deported from Iran to the US for possessing explosives and committing check fraud. While he was out on bail, he also tried to fake his death. Further proving his possible identity as Cooper, his physical qualities matched the description of Cooper. Reviewing his crimes, he seemed like he could pull off the kind of plane hijacking that Cooper did and successfully go into oblivion. Lastly, we have Kenneth Christensen. He was a trained Army paratrooper and flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, whose flight was hijacked by Cooper. He died in 1994 before anyone could dig into this speculation. His brother, Lyle, watched a documentary on DB Cooper hijacking and was convinced that his brother was behind the plot as he had once mentioned the scheme to him, except that he didn't know he executed it in reality. His position as a crew member of the airline makes it more believable because he would be familiar with the airline's operations and could predict what he could get away with. Despite these arguments and the evidence backing them, investigators have ruled out all 3 individuals as suspects in the case. This doesn't mean the public conforms to the FBI's investigations. In the eyes of the public, these individuals can very much be D.B. Cooper. However, let's examine why the FBI dismissed each of them as suspects, and we can decide if they are sufficient to let them off the hook. In McCoy's case, he was ruled out as a suspect because he didn't match the description provided for Cooper, and he was nowhere near Seattle when the Boeing 727 was hijacked. Besides, McCoy was sloppy, unlike Cooper. Ultimately, McCoy was merely a copycat and still couldn't pull off the hijacking successfully. In Rackstraw's case, there was no basis for suspecting him. Anyone could be in possession of explosives and commit check fraud. There was insufficient reason to link him to D.B. Cooper. Investigators could not find any concrete evidence against him, so he was let go. Also, he would have been just 24 years old at the time of the hijacking, whereas witnesses described Cooper as in his mid-40s. Investigators didn't give the slightest attention to Christensen's brother's claims, and rightly so. Christensen didn't match Cooper's physical description and facial structures, as shown in the sketch. 51 years is a long time to hold on to a mystery that may never be solved. But human curiosity will never be put to rest until there are answers. What is your answer? Do you believe D.B. Cooper survived the jump, or did he plummet to his death? And if you think he did, which of the suspects is your D.B. Cooper? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Likewise, turn on notifications so you never miss a video.